And we're happy to have Anna Wolfe on again because, as we said, she is doing important work. And Anna, just off the start here, and thank you again for making time. If people want to contribute to the kind of work you're doing, because it's important that local spaces have resources to do this kind of work, what would you suggest that they do right off the top? And thank you again for making time for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. We do have a donate button at the top of our website, which is MississippiToday.org. We do operate on donations and foundational support. So yeah, please support us if you support this work.
We covered some of this ground before, but just for people who are new to the conversation right now, because there have been updates since last time we talked to you, can you just explain to the people just why it is you're involved in this kind of journalism, how poor Mississippi is, and why this is a spiritual endeavor for you that is often quite thankless, with powerful people not wanting you to get at some of the information you're trying to get?
Yeah, Mississippi is the most impoverished state in the country. So about 1 in 5 people live in poverty here in Mississippi. I think that we have a huge issue with generational poverty. You know, across the country, a lot of people are living in situational poverty. It doesn't last very long. But here we have, deep systemic generational entrenched poverty as a result of our history, which overlaps with race and racism, of course. And I kind of just wanted to get at the heart of that poverty question. Like, why can't Mississippi get off the bottom, right? And it seemed like a pretty obvious way to start would be to look at our social safety net programs. The Department of Human Services in Mississippi is the agency that administers federal safety net funds. What are we doing with this money that we get from the feds every year to solve poverty? I wasn't seeing it. I wasn't seeing the results. So I kind of started grilling the agency back in 2017, 18, 19, trying to get records to show what they were doing with this program, and just hit barrier after barrier in getting information, lots of intimidation and gaslighting. But eventually all of the work sort of culminated to the auditor making 6 arrests back in 2020. And ever since then, it's just been kind of a mad dash to figure out what happened to all of this money that was misspent, which sounds like was near $100 million in total.
How much of that money do you think was spent the way it was intended out of $100 million? Far as you can tell.
About $100 million is what they're questioning, which means that the money was spent in a way that was in violation of federal regulations, or was spent without proper documentation, so that auditors couldn't tell if the money was spent legally or not, which essentially means that it's not legal, right? If you don't have documentation. So, I mean, I'll tell you that a lot of the programs that we were supporting with this money are things that you and I might find valuable to society, things like autism centers and support for children with intellectual disabilities, things that, you and I might find valuable, but weren't necessarily geared to low income people, and therefore shouldn't have been supported with these particular dollars.
Let's go through real quickly before we get to the Brett Favre portion of this. Can you just explain to us, beyond those numbers, the water crisis, the poverty crisis in Mississippi right now, as you go door to door on some of this reporting, is what? Just so that people understand who is being stolen from here.
Yeah, so it's hard to separate the story about TANF, this federal fund, temporary assistance for needy families, from the foster care story and the story about family separations in Mississippi. So a lot of the time, the families that we're talking about who could be supported with these dollars are families that are being separated. We have a huge foster care population for our size, and these are children who have been taken from their homes and placed with foster care families or others. Instead of being kept with their parents and supported with some of these dollars, that money can be used to, for example, put a bed in the home or make sure that the lights and water are on in the home. And those are the kinds of things that could keep families together when they're instead being separated because of, reasons of neglect. But I mean, the population living in poverty in Mississippi is huge comparatively. And, these are good people. We have great people in Mississippi, and it's just terrible what's happened, that this money has been diverted away from the people who needed it most.
What can you tell people about the latest developments since the last time we talked that are the most important developments as the flames continue to accelerate around Brett Favre?
So the reason that this story blew up here about a month ago is because of new text messages that were entered into court within this state civil suit that the state is bringing against 38 people or companies that received this money improperly. And the texts are being put forth because Nancy New, who is a nonprofit founder who has already pled guilty to many charges, many crimes related to the spending of these funds, she's being sued now civilly, and she has subpoenaed the former governor, Phil Bryant, as part of her defense in that suit. She's saying, hey, I mean, I'm taking responsibility for what I've done. I've already pled guilty over here, but y'all are ignoring the fact that this was state sanctioned. This was coming from the top. In some cases, the governor was directing me to do these things. And so she has subpoenaed Phil Bryant's communication, specifically surrounding the volleyball project, where $5 million in welfare funds was used to build a volleyball stadium at Southern Miss. And she wants that communication to support her defense that Phil Bryant was really the one, operating this. And Phil Bryant has objected to that subpoena. There's been a sort of court battle as a result of that. And both sides have presented text messages to support their side in this fight over whether the subpoena will be followed or not. So Nancy New's side put forth text messages between her and Favre that showed them discussing the volleyball stadium. And even at one point, Brett Favre was asking, if UFSM can't take the money, maybe you can pay me under an advertising contract, and then I'll put the money in the volleyball stadium. So you can see kind of the workarounds that they were trying to pull. And then after we spoke the first time, Phil Bryant put forward his own cache of text messages that showed that he was trying to pump the brakes near the end in 2019 when Brett Favre came back for him for more money to the governor. The governor was saying, we need to follow the law. There was even a text message that the governor sent that said, we need to do things the right way because I'm too old for federal prison. So those were revealed within Bryant's objection to the subpoena.
Clumsy criminals. We can agree. Clumsy criminals. I'm too old for federal prison.
Always has been. Dan.
It is.
Wink emoji.
It's a bit incriminating. The I'm too old for federal prison. It's a bit of a bit of a smoking gun.
Look at me
I
committing
think there was
federal crimes.
I think it was I'm too old for federal prison, and then the emoji with the sunglasses.
Oh,
whatever.
The other emoji.
Whatever you.
Right. Wow. Look at me committing federal crimes with the Brett Favre. How lucky am I?
They would also. I love he can come back around and just deny it all. How serious could I have possibly been? Come on, I put the emojis with the sunglasses on it. I was just joking.
I mean, seriously, he was the one that put that message forward. So he's saying that exonerates him, essentially. It is interesting. The message that I just described and a lot of the messages that he put forward come in late 2019 after the auditor has already started investigating. And Bryant knows that the auditor is investigating welfare spending. And so all of these messages, the attorneys are arguing these messages can't be the ones that prove that he's innocent because he already knew that the auditor was investigating by the time he sent these. And so, of course, he's not going to incriminate himself. Of course, he's not going to type in a text message like violate TANF regs. You know what I mean? So that is kind of the argument here. And then, and so there's a missing time period in 2017, right around the time that the welfare department is committing money to the volleyball stadium. There's no text messages that have been produced between Phil Bryant and Brett Favre or Phil Bryant and John Davis, the former welfare director, that show how they were talking around exactly that time when that money was committed. And then Nancy New came back and her attorney filed a response to the objection that produced even more text messages. And I think the main thing that I took from those is that Brett Favre was actually telling Nancy in text messages that USM was scared to death, was a quote, about taking this federal grant money. He said that they were very apprehensive about taking a grant this large. They're worried about how it looks or that it passed muster. And they were talking at that time sort of about how they were going to get around this prohibition on brick and mortar. You can't use TANF money to build a building. And so they had to use a pass-through. They had to somehow separate the money from DHS and the actual construction by putting it through the nonprofit and saying that it was for something else, right? So they said that it was for programming for people in poverty, but really it was to build this volleyball stadium. And USM now is aware of this and are apparently aware enough to be nervous about it. And Brett Favre is messaging about that. So that was the big takeaway from the story over the weekend on Saturday. And I guess we're just waiting now to see, if the judge makes the governor comply with the subpoena. I'm not sure that there's going to be another production of text messages, but we'll see.
Roy asked this right before you came on. Shouldn't those text messages be enough to prove that Favre was in the wrong here?
That's a good question. I don't think that's for me to decide. I think that there's all kinds of considerations that prosecutors are making based on, what shows intent, what his criminal intent might have been. I think that, and I've said this most recently, there's a world in which Favre really didn't know what he was doing was illegal for sure. Wrong is kind of another, there's difference between legalities and moralities, right? I think he realized that they had to justify what they were doing by saying that they were helping people in poverty, knowing full well that that was not the intent of the project. The project was to build a volleyball stadium at USM. Now, if you're going to just, help some people over here on the side and that was going to justify it, that might be legal, but most everyone in this room can identify that that's not right.
Oh, but I can't imprison you for immorality.
Right. So a lot of people following this story are wholly consumed by the idea of charges, criminal charges. That's never been my priority. I'm just reporting on, I am reporting on right and wrong. I think I'm just, putting out information that readers can decide for themselves. But ultimately, this is how our state operates. I think that readers are deserve to know, people in Mississippi deserve to know how the government is operating, whether it was legal or not.
Best guess, consequences, not just for Favre, but Favre and beyond. And a lot of people do want you to tell them that there are going to be consequences for Favre beyond stain on name.
Yeah, and I can't say that, the feds work very slowly and quietly. Someone did ask recently, why haven't charges been brought yet? Well, John Davis just pled guilty to federal charges 2 weeks ago. I don't think people realize that in the last 2.5 years, as we've known about this because of state charges, not federal, and then they passed the case over to the feds, that there has not been a single charge by the feds in this entire scandal until 2 weeks ago against John Davis. And so they work quietly, they work slowly, and John Davis has agreed to aid the prosecution. And so I think we're just waiting to see what they do with that. Prosecutors have promised that they're moving up the ladder. Up the ladder from John Davis is Phil Bryant, his boss. The closest evidence that we have about Phil Bryant's involvement in TANF misspending is the Brett Favre projects. So I don't think you can, I think we can definitely be safe saying that the feds are looking into these Brett Favre projects. Whether they're going to find anything that allows them to take it to a grand jury or that they feel comfortable enough taking, we'll just have to see.
And are you almost saddened at all that the coverage of this story growing is on the basis of Brett Favre's celebrity rather than the crimes here or the misuse of government funds or the brokenness of our political system?
Absolutely. But I've been covering this story for 5 years now. And so while it's maybe saddening, I'm not surprised by it. It's not like the national media was calling me up in 2019 when I was telling everybody that welfare money was being spent on college scholarships for wealthy white kids, right? These are deep issues within our social safety net policies. And that's not a sexy story for the national media.
Have you been surprised, because a lot of people have been saying, and this is complicated subject matter, Anna, because as you've said, the work that you have done has been years in the making and none of it has gotten this kind of attention. But even with that said, the sports media hasn't been great about covering this either, where it is something that has made its way somewhat into the mainstream, but that took plenty of time too. And still, it doesn't seem like people understand how to talk about this story, because you are talking about something as simple as Brett Favre taking money, and you told us last time, a little money goes a long way to making somebody's life less inconvenient, given the poverty we're talking about. This is a lot of money to steal from people that you are actively making suffer a little more than they need to.
Yeah, I actually have been kind of impressed and thankful for some of the sports reporters and sports media. I mean, I've done interviews now with a lot of different stations, and I think the sports people get it. I think that they get that these are larger issues based on the questions that they've been asking. I mean, we started this whole show talking about my reporting and poverty and social safety net, policies. So I haven't seen the entirety of media that's been out there from the sports stations, but I actually appreciate the way that a lot of the sports folks sort of are good about making that intersection, between sports and culture and society. So look, I'm just not surprised,
You say you're not surprised, but it's got to be a daily kind of disheartening, right? You have to feel like Don Quixote. This is actually a breakthrough. In your 5 years of reporting, you're finally getting people to pay attention. However it is you got them to pay attention to something, you're now getting them to pay attention to 5 years worth of exhaustive reporting with a whole lot of obstacles on it. I cannot express to the audience how many powerful people with wealth would do a great job of presenting her with a whole lot of roadblocks so she would have never gotten to the truth of this story. It's hard work what you do.
It is, yeah. I identified that from the beginning in 2020. When Brett Favre's name first came up, I had been, my first records request to the department trying to get at this issue was in 2017. It took a year fighting over this records request, and I finally made a complaint against the department in 2018. Fast forward 2020 is when Brett Favre's name comes up, and I'm like, this might be actually the thing that makes people care. But then it took another 2 years, and of course the pandemic probably had something to do with that, but another 2 years, and text messages where Brett Favre was saying, is there any way that the media can find out? I think was the big, that was the
always
communication
has been.
that really blew
He
us.
always
Very
has
sloppy,
been a
I'm telling
clumsy
you.
criminal.
Yeah.
Always has been. We asked you this last time you were on with us,
amazing.
and I want to ask you again. Over the last week or since the last time you were on with us, what's the time that you called your friends or came home and were like, holy shit, you're not going to believe this thing I've been talking about way too much around us lately, and you guys are sick of hearing? You're not going to believe what happened this time. You're not going to believe what was found this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm desensitized to it now. So when I pulled up the text messages and I saw that, and I think this was before. No, this was after we spoke. So I pulled up these text messages, and there was one from Brett Favre that said, can we, someone had mentioned maybe we could use the prison industries to build something related to the volleyball stadium. I mean, he's talking about using prisoners.
It's always been a clumsy
kind of eye-opening.
criminal.
And then,
always has been. Oh, and we know this about him. He's always been a clumsy criminal. He was asking, not only do I want to steal from the poor, but can I use the prison system to build the volleyball stadium for my daughter?
incredible. I think the text messages related to USM were pretty out there as well. Where he's saying
can't make it
that
up.
they're scared to death to take this money. It's like, why was no one yielding to these breaks?
Anna, thank you again for the reporting that you're doing and continue to do. You have done. Again, MississippiToday.org. We ask our listeners to donate to causes that are worthy. She is doing something worthy for a whole lot of people that not enough people care about. Anna, thank you again. Appreciate the time. and the reporting.
Thank you. Thank you so much.